Hello, everybody. As the title states, today I'm going to be going over fat loss, how it actually works. I don't think many people understand how fat loss works. So I'm going to teach you. And I'm also going to go over the best way to mobilize and lose fat. In essence, shrinking your fat cells so that way you appear leaner. 1 second. So I'm going to go over the biochemistry of fat loss briefly, very basically, and the conditions that your body is going to need in order to make this happen. So, first of all, let's talk about what body fat or adipose tissue actually is. What adipose tissue is it's kind of like a sac that holds something called triacylglycerides. Now, triacylglycerides are free fatty acids connected to glucose molecules, and that is the form that they are stored in the adipose cell as. So basically what happens is if you have, extra substrate or glucose is converted into free fatty acids, and then it is absorbed into, it interacts with a receptor on your fat cell, and then is converted into triacylglycerides and stored in your adipose tissue or fat cells for later use. So how do we extract this tissue out of the adipose tissue or the fat cell, essentially shrinking the size of the fat cells? So just like anything, think of it like a balloon. When you push air into a balloon, it gets bigger. Same thing with an adipose cell. When you shove fatty acids in there and store them as triacylglycerides, the cell will expand. When you pull the triacylglycerides out, the cell will contract and shrink. So that is what fat loss is. You're not actually, I guess you're losing fatty acids as they're converted into the working tissue, into ATP, and then burned off. But essentially, you're just shrinking the adipose tissue cell. So these cells, again, as we went over in the last live stream, you are born with a certain amount of these cells. You can actually grow more cells through something called hyperplasia, but we won't get into that. You are born with a particular number of cells. You cannot lose these cells. You don't lose the fat cell. You simply shrink them. Or through liposuction, you can surgically remove them. So keep in mind, I don't like to use the word burn fat because you're not burning anything. You are mobilizing free fatty acids. A little more coffee here. So how does this work? I bet you guys are very excited for all of this science. So you've got Ace, lay down. Sorry, my dog is being incredibly annoying. Lay down. So you've got these adipose cells holding this stored energy for later use, right? So what stimulates the cell to release this stored energy? There's a couple of ways. We're going to go over two. There are about 3 or 4 different ways. But 2 meaningful ways to stimulate the adipose or fat cell to release or convert the triacylglyceride into free fatty acids into the bloodstream to be used by cells. One is an increase in something called glucagon. So glucagon rises in your bloodstream when insulin decreases, or your blood sugar goes down and insulin decreases. So if you haven't eaten for a few hours and your blood sugar is getting low and you're getting a little low on energy, and insulin goes down, glucagon upregulates in the bloodstream. So the increase of glucagon in the bloodstream will stimulate the adipose tissue or fat tissue to start mobilizing the energy inside of it. Another way to stimulate the release of fatty acids from the fat cell is an increase in adrenaline. So the first way, glucagon, would be from a calorie deficit or a fast. So if you are eating less calories than your body needs, your insulin is going to effectively be lower. Or if you are fasting, your insulin levels are going to lower over time, and that is going to stimulate an increase in glucagon and an increase in fat mobilization from the fat cells to make up your energy demands. Adrenaline, this can be looked at the exercise side of fat mobilization. So a lot of people use exercise as a way to burn fat. Well, it does, but not really as effectively, and especially not the way most people exercise. And it's because adrenaline is the stimulus, which stimulates the fat cell to release fatty acids for energy and essentially, shrink the fat cell. So what stimulates adrenaline? Really, really hard muscular work, high amounts of effort, high amounts of intensity. Going for a walk is not going to stimulate adrenaline unless you're attacked by a tiger, which is the third way, cortisol, to stimulate mobilization of fat tissue. But I'm not getting into the cortisol because it's irrelevant. So adrenaline. So if you want to stimulate the mobilization of fat out of your fat cells, you need to exercise hard with a high amount of intensity of effort, because this intensity of effort is going to stimulate the release of adrenaline or epinephrine, and that is going to stimulate the mobilization of your free fatty acids out of your adipose tissue or your fat cells. Simple, right? This is why steady state, low intensity exercise does very little to almost nothing for fat loss. The exercise itself isn't actually really mobilizing the fat. It is the energy deficit that you're creating, hopefully, if you're doing it properly, through the exercise, which is increasing the amount of glucagon in the bloodstream. But you're not actually stimulating the mobilization of fat through the exercise, through the adrenaline. So it's not the exercise itself that's actually burning off the fat. It is the negative energy balance increasing the amount of glucagon in your bloodstream. Is everybody with me? I normally don't get this deep into the science because it could bore the hell out of you, but I feel like if you understand this, things are going to make a lot more sense to you. So you're going to want to watch. I'm not going to make this too long today. I might take 5 questions or something, but I'm not going to make this too long because I want you to be able to rewatch this so you can understand this process. So when glucagon increases or adrenaline increases in the bloodstream, it binds to a glucagon or an adrenaline receptor. And then when it binds to this receptor and enters the cell, stimulates something called, or it activates something called, I have a hard time pronouncing this, adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase. This is an enzymatic process. So once the glucagon reaches the glucagon receptor, or the adrenaline reaches the adrenaline receptor, depending on how you're mobilizing your fat, it's going to stimulate adenylyl cyclase, which is an enzymatic process. That process is going to activate something called cyclic AMP. Now, these things, they're not too important. This is just kind of the step-by-step process. These are the enzymatic processes that happen in the fat cell. Cyclic AMP then activates an enzyme called protein kinase A, which in turn phosphorylates something that, if you've read or listened to Doug McGuff, something called hormone-sensitive lipase. And hormone-sensitive lipase actually mobilizes the free fatty acid or pulls the triacylglyceride out of the cell and turns it into free fatty acids. So basically, you've got your glucose and your free fatty acid. They're combined, they're bonded together, and then when hormone-sensitive lipase pulls it out, the bond breaks, which essentially creates some energy, and now you've got some glucose floating around and some free fatty acids floating around. So hormone-sensitive lipase does this. And then once it pulls out the triacylglyceride and breaks the glucose bond from the free fatty acid bond into the bloodstream, now you've got the free fatty acid and the glucose into the bloodstream, in which case there's a specific carrier that isn't really important that brings the fatty acid over to the cell, and then it will enter the cell and perform the citric acid cycle, which we could go over in the future, thus producing ATP from breaking down the free fatty acid into ATP. And ATP is used by the working tissue to create muscular contractions, whatever working tissue it might be. So let's go over it briefly. Glucagon or adrenaline upregulation from either intense work, fasting, or calorie deficit. Binds, so the upregulation of the glucagon or the adrenaline binds to a glucagon or an adrenaline receptor, which activates adenylyl cyclase, which in turn activates cyclic AMP, which activates an enzyme called protein kinase A, which phosphorylates hormone-sensitive lipase, pretty much gets it pulls a phosphate off of it and gets it to work to pull out the triacylglyceride, break it into free fatty acids and glucose into the bloodstream. And then your free fatty acids are going to be carried to a working tissue cell, put through the citric acid cycle to create ATP for the muscle tissue to use and produce a contraction. All right, a little bit confusing, I know. So how do we create an environment conducive to this happening? Well, let's go over the glucagon part. So if we want an increase in glucagon, which is going to stimulate the mobilization of fat out of the cell, we need a reduction in insulin. So if your insulin is too high, lipolysis will not happen, meaning you will not break down the fat tissue. So how do we keep insulin low? First of all, well, a calorie deficit in general will lower insulin and allow this process to happen. But keeping carbohydrates relatively low will keep insulin low, which will create an environment conducive to lipolysis and conducive to this process. That is why, for most people, low carbohydrate diets are better for fat loss, because when insulin is too high, you will not have much glucagon in your bloodstream, which is the stimulus for fat mobilization. That is why low carb diets, for the most part, work for most people. But again, it is a spectrum. There are some people who are super sensitive, some people who have lots of glucagon floating through their body and don't need low carbohydrate diets. But in general, a lower carbohydrate diet will create an environment conducive to this process. Also, fasting. So fasting allows your blood sugar to gradually dip. When your blood sugar dips, insulin dips until you eat something and stimulate the production of insulin. And when blood sugar and insulin dip, glucagon goes up, stimulates lipolysis, stimulates the fat mobilization process. So, low carbohydrate diet, fasting, and of course, calorie deficit. So when you don't have enough energy to carry out your body's functions, insulin is going to lower, glucagon is going to go up, so that way it can break down this fat tissue, get the free fatty acids, and get the energy that it needs. So those are the three ways: low carb diet, fasting, calorie deficit. The easiest way is just a calorie deficit. If you were doing a calorie deficit, you don't necessarily need to do any sort of fasting. But the best calorie deficit is going to be a low carb calorie deficit for most people. So that is the fat loss process. That is how to create an environment conducive to fat loss. And where your exercise comes in is to place a heavy demand on your muscle tissue in order to preserve the muscle tissue as fat is lost. Because although this fat mobilization process, this is one way to supply your body with extra energy that it needs to carry out its functions and survive, but it can also break down muscle tissue. It can break down muscle tissue into energy, excess muscle tissue into energy the same way. So when you're placing a high demand on your muscle tissue through resistance training, your body is going to perceive the muscle as a necessity for survival. So what it's going to do in that case is it's going to preserve the muscle, and it's going to place more of a demand or more of an emphasis on fat mobilization rather than muscle tissue breakdown to meet its energy requirements. So exercise shouldn't be used as a way to mobilize fat, although adrenaline will mobilize fat. It's not going to mobilize very much. You're going to need the calorie deficits. You can continue to mobilize fat consistently over time. Then the exercise comes in as a way to preserve the lean, valuable tissue, which is going to be your muscle tissue. And if you're preserving and building your muscle tissue, you are going to build and preserve your bone tissue, connective tissue, neural tissue. All this other stuff works with the muscle. So calorie deficit, fasting, or a low carb diet in conjunction with resistance training is the most effective fat loss approach you can take. Not spinning, not jogging, not yoga. These things are not going to either produce a large enough negative energy balance or stimulate enough adrenaline in order to mobilize a significant amount of fat tissue. It just will not. That is the reality of the situation. So this fat mobilization takes time. It takes a lot of time. So you've got to be patient. There is also a limit to how much fat you can mobilize every day. So if you were to legitimately starve yourself and eat nothing every day, only so much energy is going to come from your fat tissue. And then the rest of it's going to come from other tissue, like your bone, connective, and muscle tissue. So don't try to take a shortcut by just starving yourself. Because again, remember, the goal is to preserve the lean tissue. The reason we even eat during a fat loss program is to get enough protein, nutrients, and minerals to preserve the good tissue. So that way we can improve our overall body composition. Theoretically, yes, you could starve yourself and lose a lot of fat, but you're going to lose a lot of the good stuff with it. So in a nutshell, just about 15 to 20 minutes of explanation. That is how fat loss works, and that is how you want to approach it. Of course, there are many ways to create a calorie deficit, many ways to do all this stuff, but this is the most effective way. Again, I'm going to repeat it one more time. Calorie deficit, fasting, low carb diet to stimulate glucagon to increase lipolysis or fat tissue mobilization. Now, with that said, is there any questions? Okay, let's bring this one up. I'm doing keto and intermittent fasting for my weight loss. So the reason, here's the thing. Keto can work. There's no additional benefit of doing keto compared to simply doing a low carb or any sort of calorie deficit diet. Keto has been marketed like some kind of super diet. It is not. It is not. Yes, if you're eating mostly fat and protein, your insulin's going to be a little bit lower. But you still need to be in a calorie deficit or you're not going to lose fat. And if you're in a calorie deficit, the intermittent fasting is going to have relatively little effect. It will have an effect, but not as much as, you got to remember, like all these things that, the reason we even heard about keto or the reason we even hear about intermittent fasting is because it's just something new for people to promote or get attention or market, whatever. They're not going to, if you're in a calorie deficit and your carbs are relatively low and you're controlling insulin, which low carb and calorie deficit are going to do, you don't necessarily need to do keto or intermittent fasting. Simply a diet with adequate protein intake, which is going to be about 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass that you're carrying, and a calorie deficit. How much, carbs and fat? Once you do that, you're gonna be better off. Most people are going to be better off lower carb. But the problem I have with keto is it's pretty difficult to eat a strict keto diet. And it's kind of silly because it doesn't give you any additional benefit to just a calorie restricted diet. Now, are there any more questions about diet, fat loss? There's got to be a bunch of questions about fat loss. I would not doubt it. Let me remove this. Let's see what else. Oh, here's one thing I just want to talk about. What's it called? There's this process that I had a client doing, and she overpaid tremendously for it, where you essentially freeze your fat cells. What's it called? Cool sculpting? Yeah, it's called cool sculpting. This doesn't work, okay? Now, let's think about the biochemistry I just went over. Increasing a couple of these enzymes or adrenaline or glucagon to stimulate lipolysis to remove triacylglyceride from the fat cell, thus shrinking it like a balloon. That is the process that needs to happen. You have to pull the free fatty acids out of the cell to get it to shrink. Cool sculpting has tried to convince people that you can freeze the fat cell. Okay. Where are the fatty acids going? They're not going anywhere. You can't freeze and kill and just essentially. So what they're essentially promoting is that you have fatty acids in your cell, you freeze it, and the fatty acids just disappear into thin air. No. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. So cool sculpting does not work because you cannot just obliterate and evaporate triacylglyceride from the cell and make it shrink. So any quick fat loss gimmick out there like that doesn't work. It has to follow the biochemical process that I just described. You can physically remove the fat tissue from your body through liposuction. Obviously, that works. But wearing these waist trainers or cool sculpting or all this other BS doesn't follow the biochemical process of lipolysis, and it will not shrink your fat cells. Don't waste your money. see, 601. Let's see, other gimmicks. Again, sit-ups. Sit-ups for fat loss around the midsection. So you're working the muscle tissue underneath this fat tissue. Basically, what you're doing is contracting the muscle tissue. This has no effect on the factors that I went over that stimulate lipolysis. Working your muscle tissue very hard, well, it will stimulate adrenaline, but it will not stimulate lipolysis in that specific area. So there's an erroneous belief, it is wrong, that if you work a particular area, you're going to lose fat around that particular area you're working. Lipolysis happens overall throughout your entire body. It does not happen locally at the limb or at the muscle that you are working. Lipolysis happens systemically. So doing abdominal exercises will not mobilize the fat tissue around your midsection. Doing triceps extensions, if you're a woman, will not get rid of the bat wings on the back of your arms because lipolysis is systemic. It is not localized. Make sense? All right. So unless there are any other questions, I was just doing a short explanation about fat loss by request. This is how it works. That is how you approach it. If there are any other questions, I'll give you another 30 seconds or so, and I will answer them. And again, we are born with a certain number of fat cells. So some people who have a lot of fat cells may not be able to get ripped. Keep that in mind. It is not up to you how lean you get. It is generally up to your genetics. Good question. How many grams of protein is needed in a calorie deficit to maintain muscle? So about 1 gram per pound of lean body weight or 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. So if you are 200 pounds and 20% body fat, you're going to need about 160 grams of protein a day. If you weigh 90 kilos, you're going to need you want twice. You want 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So if you weigh 80 kilos, you want about 160 grams of protein. So when you're in a calorie deficit or a fat loss diet, you want to focus on your protein first. So say you're that 200-pound person, 20% body fat, you want 160 grams of protein. So there are 4 calories in 1 gram of protein. So you multiply 160 grams by 4 calories, and that's 640 calories. Say your basal metabolic rate is 1,800. The amount of calories you need each day to maintain your current body composition. So what you'll want to do is subtract 640 from 1,800. So 640 is the amount of calories you're getting through that 160 grams of protein. And now you're left with 1,160 calories that you're going to make up between fat and carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are another 4 calories per gram. So a low carb diet would be generally, 100 grams of carbohydrates or less. So 1160, 100 grams by 4. So 1160 minus an additional 400 calories through carbs leaves you with 760 calories to be made up through fat. So you're going to have essentially 600. So if your basal metabolic rate is 1,800 calories, you're going to essentially have about 500 calories through fat, 400 through carbs, and about 650 through protein. But again, you can, it can vary a little bit and you'll be fine. Is it possible to gain muscle in a calorie deficit? It is absolutely possible to gain muscle in a calorie deficit, especially if you are a beginner. There was a study done in 1975, I believe, which showed that even in starvation conditions, rat models, if their muscle was stimulated intensely enough, they would still build muscle in starvation conditions. So the key word is stimulating the muscle intensely. If you train really hard and you're in a calorie deficit, your body will grow muscle tissue. Because think about it. Evolutionarily speaking, we evolved in a food scarce environment. We still needed muscle. So the body did not evolve to only build muscle in a calorie surplus. So the reason we would need more muscle evolutionarily is to try to get food or prevent ourselves from becoming food. Those are the two scenarios which we would use our muscles intensely. Hunting and trying to catch food, or running and fighting, trying to avoid becoming food. In both of those situations, you would very seldomly be in a calorie surplus. We lived in a food scarce environment. You were maybe breaking even. Very seldom is there a calorie surplus or food surplus environment, especially when you need to use your muscle the most. The reason you need to use your muscle the most is because you are trying to survive. So evolutionarily, you would have built muscle usually in a calorie deficit, almost never in a calorie surplus. So the belief that you need a calorie surplus to build muscle is absolute nonsense. Yes, it will help, but is it necessary? No. So you recommend intensity training for over 50 years. 50 years old? Yes, because intensity of effort is the stimulus to make your body change. Doesn't matter how old you are. I've had 80-year-olds that I would train to muscle failure. It's not, I don't even want to call this intensity training. This is just training. The precursor or the requirement for building muscle tissue or getting your body to respond is intensity. Without intensity of effort, it is not exercise. So if you want to exercise, it must be intense by nature. So anything besides intense exercise is not exercise. So if you're 50 years old and a lot of people believe like, if you're older, you shouldn't be doing something intense. No, that's when you need intense exercise, because you will lose muscle tissue every single year until you die. And the weaker you get and the less muscle you have, the shorter your lifespan and the higher likelihood of disease, breaks, injuries, slower your metabolism. Resistance training is probably the most important for people 50 and over, because muscle loss for people 50 and older is pretty much the primary reason for all of their health problems. The reason for their increase in disease, the reason for their increase in body fat, the reason for their increase in aches and pains, the reason for their increase, especially back pain, the reason for their increase in heart problems, all has to do with reduction of muscle tissue over time, reduction in insulin sensitivity. Okay. Is soy really harmful? I have no idea. I guess it raises estrogen. I won't touch it. I'll just put it that way. Not for me, man. Any book about HIIT you recommend? I had read Body by Science. Body by Science is a good one. Anything from Ellington Darden, Mike Menser, Drew Bay, www.baye.com. He has a great forum. John Little. I think where my books are. Yeah, them and me. There are lots of books about HIIT out there. Ellington Darden would be a good place to start. Actually, no, Drew Bay would be a good place to start. Ken Hutchins too. Very technical, might bore you, but I love Ken Hutchins and all of his books. They're unbelievable. Training frequency per muscle group in the week varies tremendously based on the individual and the volume. So you want to start off with, I've gone over this in other live streams, you want to start off with a pretty basic workout, maybe 7 to 12 exercises, track your progress, see how you respond. Most people, here's the thing, it's so much easier not to schedule your workout schedule based on a 7-day week. It's better to train 2 to 3 days of rest, train 2 to 3 days of rest, repeat. Because if you're training on Monday and then training on Thursday, some days you're going to get 2 days of rest, some days you're going to get 3. It doesn't make any sense. Don't base it on the 7-day. I would say most people could train every third day a full body workout and be fine. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off, Thursday train, Friday, Saturday off, Sunday train. You could even put them a little closer together based on your intensity, but you have to experiment with this. It is not a one size fits all. Some people can handle more, some people less. I need at least 3 full days between workouts or I am done. Don't want to go to the gym to work out. Calisthenics is a good alternative. I'm a 36-year-old male. Calisthenics is not exercise. Calisthenics is movement. Just because exercise involves movement does not mean all movement is exercise. Calisthenics will do very little. Calisthenics is equivalent to trying to get a suntan under a light bulb. It is not intense enough. You're going to want to do a body weight training program. Again, Drew Baye, www.baye.com, has a very good body weight training program. I don't have one because it's just not something I'm interested in, but www.baye.com has a great body weight training program, which you could get the same results if you went to a gym. He goes very deep into it. But calisthenics, and I think I don't even know what people mean by calisthenics anymore. Let me just Google it. I mean, when I think of calisthenics, I think of when I was in gym class in high school, to me, calisthenics is jumping jacks or burpees. That stuff is horrible. It's pointless. Calisthenics would be a waste of your time. You might break a sweat, your heart rate might go up, but you will barely stimulate improvements in any of the 5 general trainable factors of functional ability. Almost no strength, no muscular size, cardiovascular fitness, none of that stuff. Very, very little. Kettlebell dumbbells at home, that's really all you need, honestly. If you're doing it properly, moving slowly, creating moment arms, good effective moment arms, which you're going to place a lot of tension on the muscle. You can do a lot, which is a set of, a couple, 10, 20, 30-pound dumbbells. I mean, kettlebells are just improperly designed. There's almost nothing I would do with a kettlebell besides maybe a goblet squat. But again, if you had dumbbells, you'd be better off holding the weights on your side and doing a squat. Kettlebells are trash, really. But if you had one of those door chin-up bars, some dumbbells, that's pretty much all you need. You could do a lot. And again, I recommend Drew Baye's Project Kratos body weight training program. Goes in depth about explaining all this. But if you want optimal results, you're probably going to want to go to a gym. If you want the best results, you're going to want to get a high intensity training instructor. Okay? So I'll take 1 or 2 more questions if anybody has them. I'm trying to keep these a little shorter so people get bored looking through them. But again, if you follow me on my Instagram, which is J__Vincent, that's 2 underscores, over the next several months, I'm going to be chopping these up into little 4 to 8 minute segments, so you don't have to come to the video and go through the whole thing to find the information you want. I'm going to be putting them on Instagram that way, some of them on YouTube, and I'm also working on starting a private Patreon group. So I'm going to continue doing these live streams, but I'm going to provide more information, more in-depth information, more almost personal coaching, live Q&A sessions every week on a Patreon page with a membership. It's going to be a low-cost membership, and basically I'm going to do 2-3 videos a week, and every week do an hour and a half Q&A answering your specific questions. Is there a HIT specific certification you can get similar to CPT certification? Yes. HITUni.com. Hold on one second. I'll put it up here. www.hituni.com. That word? Show. HITUni.com is a website which offers high-intensity training certifications. You don't need a high-intensity training certification, but if you were to take one of these courses, I also have a course. It's called the Jay Vincent Ultimate Physique course. I recommend you guys take that. It's going to go in depth with a lot of these topics. And then also the HIT Uni certification courses are going to go even further in depth than that. Mine's a little more surface level, but hituni.com, if you take one or two of those courses, and especially my course, that's going to give you pretty much everything you need to know to get started with HIT. But again, there's I don't even like calling it HIT. It's just exercise. But to get familiar with the physiology of exercise, hituni.com is going to help you with that. And again, a lot of the books by Ellington Darden, Drew Bay, Ken Hutchins, etc. Would you recommend resistance bands and a kettlebell? Resistance bands are okay. Again, anything that provides resistance. If you provide resistance on the muscle tissue and fatigue aggressively to the point where it's not really capable of any further movement, you're going to stimulate the whole process. Resistance bands can do it, but it will do so relatively ineffectively. Because the problem with a resistance band is as the band stretches, the resistance increases. But that is not how your muscle works. Your muscles vary with the amount of resistance they provide throughout a range of motion. For instance, when your arm is fully straight, it can't produce very much contractile force. Once you get to about 90 degrees, it produces the most force, and then it drops off again, producing less force when you fully contract the muscle. So if I were to curl the resistance band, I would get the most resistance where the muscle is the weakest in the fully contracted position. So you're not going to get a very efficient version of muscular loading with a resistance band. What I would do with a resistance band is I would just do isometric contractions or time static contractions. But again, with that, you'd be better off just pushing against something that doesn't move. I think resistance bands suck and kettlebells suck too. If I would here we go. If I was Bill Gates, I would buy every kettlebell and every resistance band. I would throw them on a stranded island so nobody could ever see them again. I'll just put it that way. Is there a way to lose fat and gain muscle? Yeah. Resistance train, calorie restricted diet, calorie deficit diet. What is best for fat loss, multi-articular or insulated? Are you talking about like multi-articulate movements? Again, exercise, there's no exercise best for fat loss. There is just calorie deficit. No exercise is best for fat loss. Any intense exercise, doesn't matter what you do. If you push your body hard, that's going to be the best for fat loss, but it's still not very good for fat loss. That's like saying the best drug for you is weed because it's not heroin or it's not meth. Like it's still not good for fat loss, but it's technically the best, but it's still not good. Do not use exercise as a way to lose fat. Again, when we want to lose fat, we want to increase glucagon in the bloodstream to stimulate lipolysis. How you stimulate glucagon is calorie restricted diet, fasting, or low insulin levels. Exercise doesn't stimulate glucagon. Well, it can by lowering your blood sugar over time. But again, calorie deficit, calorie deficit, calorie deficit, calorie deficit. Low carb, lower carb, lower carb, lower carb. That's it. And if it's not working for you, so say I get this a lot from my clients. They try a calorie deficit or they try low carb and they're not losing weight. The problem is your measurements are wrong. So, say you're shooting for 1,500 calories a day. I would actually shoot for 1,200 calories a day, because whether you want to admit it or not, you're very likely eating more than you think you are. You're not. There's no way you're eating exactly 1,500 calories a day. You always want to stay on the lower side of the calorie intake, because a lot of people diet and say they're not losing weight and the diet's not working. They're in starvation mode, which is bullshit. They're not in starvation mode. And they say they're not losing weight from their diet. And the reason is they're still eating too much. If you're dieting and your weight's not going down, you're still eating too much. It's not your thyroid. It's not that you need to do more cardio. It's not that you're in starvation mode. It is you are eating too much still. Eat less. There's no excuse. There's no other reason. Just continue to eat less. A beer on Fridays? Yeah, definitely. Again, you could have a beer. Like, it's not a big deal. But again, it's about balancing what's important to you. I had this one particular client. I think I talked about him last time. He's probably about 10, 11, 12% body fat, has visible abs. I think he's only about 17, 18 years old, but he wants ripped abs. He wants to be like 7% body fat. And I explained to him, the lifestyle change that you're going to have to deal with and the amount of work and effort you're going to have to put into getting that 7% and maintaining it is not worth it. It's not worth it. Who would want to live like that? Cool. You're killing yourself, eating like a bird. Oh, but hey, you got 7% body fat and ripped abs. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your abs. All right. I'll tell you right now, like, if men are doing it for the attractiveness of women or women for the attractiveness of men, they don't really care. Nobody really cares. Is there a good home workout for pecs? What I've been doing doesn't seem to work them. Yeah, a push-up. A push-up's a great workout for pecs. I do a set of push-ups to failure, and I feel like I'm going to die. But you can do a combination. You could do, 5 or 10 reps static hold, 5 or 10 reps. Just do push-ups to failure. If you're doing push-ups to failure, but again, don't do them like this. A lot of people do it with their elbows out. This is going to be mostly a anterior delt exercise. When you do push-ups, you want them slightly in. So notice what happens to the pec muscle. When I bring my arm in, it contracts. When I bring it up, it relaxes. That's because it's transferring the tension from the pec to the front delt. So the reason you're saying it doesn't seem to work them, it's probably because your form is off. It is working them. You would not be able to push your body up off the ground without contracting your pecs. So again, just because an exercise doesn't feel like it's working particularly well does not mean it's not working particularly well, but it is. But the recommendation I would make is to bring your elbow slightly in and do a push-up like this rather than like this, like most people do. A push-up is an extremely good pec exercise. There's really nothing else you'd want to do at home for that. The difference between a push-up and like a hammer strength or a chest press machine is virtually nothing, other than you can change the resistance on the machine. But it's working the same. It's working the muscle tissue pretty much just as effectively. If you simply did a push-up, a chin-up, and a squat, you'd probably get about 80 to 90% of your muscle building potential. Like, there's really not that much that you need. The only reason you want to do some of this other variable stuff is because it's available. If it's not available and all you have is your home, you're still going to be able to build, you're still going to probably be able to get 90% of your potential working out at home if you do it properly. Again, I don't do a home body workout thing, but Drew Bay does. www.baye.com. Buy his course. It's super good. And you'll be able to get a ton out of it. I haven't done it because I don't like working out at home. I need to, be in a different different place. But again, COVID, I'm in Florida, so all the gyms are open, no mask, no nothing, go for it. So I don't even, remember what that's like not having a gym. But if you don't have a gym, home workouts are fine, or just go to a park and do some chin-ups on the monkey bars and squats. And, I could probably, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll film another park workout, a full workout. So if you got a park nearby, I got one time over the summer, I went to a park and just did a workout just to try it. And it was a hell of a workout. And I was just using playground equipment. So it doesn't really matter what you use. If you contract your muscles and generate aggressive inroad or aggressive fatigue, you will stimulate them. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Again, go back, watch the beginning of this video, go over it a couple times, understand how the fat loss process works and how to create an environment conducive to it. It's pretty darn simple. Mostly what it takes is discipline. A lot of people lack discipline. Whenever you find yourself getting lazy, remind yourself. This is something I do. Sometimes I will notice myself being lazy. Like, I have a Brita filter and it'll start, or a Brita water filter jug thing, and it'll start to get low. And I'll be like, I'll fill it up later. When I have that thought go through my head, I go, don't be lazy. Grab it, fill it. Sometimes I want to take my dog outside and I don't want to put a leash on him. I say, don't be lazy, put the leash on him. So every time you catch yourself being lazy with diet, remind yourself, don't be lazy. Don't be lazy. Don't be lazy. Discipline is key. Discipline is key for not only diet and exercise, it is key for everything in life. Without discipline, you will absolutely friggin' crumble. Discipline, discipline, discipline for a long time, forever. Be disciplined with everything forever. And if you are disciplined with your diet forever, your physique will show. It will show the results of that. Discipline. Okay? All right, guys. I'll see you later this week for another live stream video. If you have any topics that you would like me to cover, throw them there. I'm creating a nice list of topics. There's a gazillion things to go over. Throw them in the comments. Comment on my Instagram, J__Vincent. Please follow me. And anybody else who needs some exercise help, follow me. Promise to live. All right, let's see. One more. Live stream about muscles or weaknesses, or muscle imbalances and muscle weaknesses. Yes, I can do that one next time. Probably Friday night? No. What's today? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Probably Saturday night or Sunday night. I'll be covering muscle imbalances, lagging muscle groups, and how to fix them. Okay. Again, I'll put up on YouTube and social media when the live stream is going to be, but it's probably going to be on the weekend. All right, guys. Thank you. Have an excellent night. Go back and watch this video. Understand this process and take the recommendations I gave you on how to create an environment conducive to fat loss. And I promise you, you will lose fat. And if you're not losing fat, you're simply still eating too much. All right. Have a good night, guys. I will see you later this week.